Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks and welcome to my YouTube channel, The History Squad. Now today's video is about the famous First World War battle, the Battle for Vimy Ridge, fought by the Canadians, and it's said to be the first major victory during the First World War for the Allies. So the Battle for Vimy Ridge, it was the first time that all four Canadian divisions were going to fight together, right? So it's basically in the part of this massive offensive known as the Arras Offensive, this big Allied offensive in April 1917, for the heights that go right the way up. If I remember correctly, they're over 140 meters high coming from the Allied side. And when you get to the top of the Vimy Ridge, you overlook the Douai Plain. Now, if ever you've traveled around northern France, you will have seen Vimy Ridge by the two towers of the Vimy Memorial. It's quite something. The battle in itself, Vimy Ridge, is quite something. Now I say it's a Canadian show, but there were lots of Brits involved in it too. But the main fighting, it's the Canadians for sure, those four divisions. Now they were led by Lieutenant General Byng, and they called themselves Byng Boys. Byng, British aristocracy, and yet he was hands-on, and he was a good general. He had great ideas. But it was also the generals in charge of his different divisions. You've got Major General Currie, Burster, Lipset and Watson. These guys really did know what they were up to. In fact, Major General Currie became one of the most beloved major officers. In fact, if I remember correctly, he became in charge of the Canadian Army. So shows you how good he is. Lipset, by the way, General Lipset was Irish, and he was extremely popular with his troops, and he was unfortunately killed, on Vimy Ridge later on after the battle had all been finished. You know, people go on about the generals, the British generals and that kind of thing of the First World War, and they often get a bad press, like Haig, the Butcher, and so on and so forth. Well, actually, 78 generals were killed in the First World War, and they were killed in action. And it was 146 of them were also wounded. So that kind of tilts it a little bit, doesn't it? And what's going to happen on Vimy Ridge is quite something. And what makes it different is that it had been fought over many times before. The French in 1915 had done some major offensives trying to get up that hill, but they began to dig through the hill, undermining tunnels, that kind of thing. Then the British took over from the French, and the British continued to mine and do all that kind of stuff. And when the Canadians are given the job, these tunnels are going to be enlarged. British tunnelling companies, Canadian soldiers, labouring, they're going to make them bigger, they're going to make them longer. And what they're going to do is they're going to come from behind the British front line, and they're going to go all the way underneath it to the forward positions. That means that the Germans high up on the hill, hang on, German binoculars, they're going to look down and now you could see everybody coming up that great big long hill. Except now the Canadians are going to use those tunnels. They're going to give lots of attention to this so that their assault troops can get across and then jump off as quickly as they can, unseen. So you've got these tunnels, they're going to be widened, they're going to be lengthened, there's going to be headquarters, first aid stations, latrines, all the things that you need to keep thousands of troops down there for a night, maybe 2 nights, There were signalling companies down there. Men were down there full time doing their various jobs. But you've got to then bring into this plan the artillery, Now, I've heard artillery fire. Boy, does it make your ears ring. My grandfather, Second World War, Royal Artillery, deaf as a post, But the Canadians had 1,000 guns massed. And they weren't just going to fire to a fixed firing plan like they did on the Somme, which was terrible. They've actually got localized plans. And they've been practicing. And they could do this boxing in of the enemy. So they're not just blowing the enemy to pieces, they box them in. So nobody can come to resupply, bring in reinforcements, and then the Canadians can get in there and do these various things. So the artillery played a massive role in the Vimy Ridge battle. Now, I've got a shell that I recovered from the Somme battlefield. Where is he? Oh my goodness me. This is a British 18-pound shell. And true to form, it didn't go bang. It's been diffused, don't worry. But this one is a shrapnel. It's got about 2,000. In fact, let me see if I can undo it for you. $2,000 shrapnel shells inside it. Yeah, so that's will explode high up in the air. Any infantry, foot soldiers round about, it'll keep them down. High explosives will be needed for barbed wire, and then even heavier cannons will be needed to blast the German trenches. And the firing plans were brilliant. They had air balloons going up thousands of feet in the air, so they could see what the German trenches were all about, what damage was being done, was the barbed wire being cleared away. This is absolutely fantastic, because one of the big problems on the Somme, 1st of July 1916, was the British troops went forward, the Germans could see the whole lot, and also the barbed wire hadn't been destroyed. So now the Canadians are making sure, where they can, barbed wire is going to be destroyed. Now, they're going to do a concentrated fire on the foremost German trenches. They're going to obliterate them, right? The Canadians are going to be hard on the heel when they jump off, right behind this creeping barrage. But the Canadian infantry, this kind of blows my mind. They are briefed right the way down to the ordinary private soldier. He knows everything to do with the plan. He knows where to go. The sergeant knows if the sergeant major's killed, he can take over his role. If the lieutenant is killed, if the captain is killed, everybody knows each other's role. And they're not just going to run towards the enemy. As they come out of those tunnels, they're going into jumping off trenches that have been dug specially, some of them right out into no man's land. As the barrage explosives goes forward, the troops are going to follow it. But they're not going to be in great big long lines like they did on the Somme. No, they're going to be in what's called a diamond formation. Some are going to be going one behind the other with big gaps. So if there's any explosions, perhaps one guy falls instead of dozens. Yeah. And if a German machine gun sweeps the area, it's got a hard time finding the targets because they're so spread out. But then when it comes to the final assault, these troops are trained to then fall in for their attacking positions. I find this brilliant because when I was a soldier, I was trained as an infantryman first. It was time and time again, all these different formations we could do, following the signals, listening to this, and we would automatically form an extended line or whatever it was we had to do, arrowhead formation, yeah? These guys, that's amongst the first to do it. And what's happened is this, the First World War, it's a learning curve. Think about it. August 1914, when war broke out, there wasn't a book, was there, that says, this is how you fight the First World War. No, we had to learn. We had to learn what the artillery could do, what the machine guns can do. So the Canadians, right, the 8th of April, 1917, all briefed, all ready, are going down into their tunnels. They're going to stay there overnight. And there's the most wonderful thing they did was they signed their names in the chalk, because these had lighting in these tunnels. And they carved thousands and thousands of a symbol. The maple leaf cap badge. They're proud of it. Amongst them, ancestors of mine. My family have been coming to Canada generations, and they fought for it in both wars. So I'm kind of proud of this, you know. And now I've been down those tunnels many times. You can't go down all of them anymore, but I've been to some of the deepest, and it's quite wow. But anyway, let's get back to the battle. So, dawn, 9th of April. Do you know they did quite a clever thing? Some tunnelers actually tunneled into no man's land and laid down an explosive and blew an extra trench. This kind of blows my mind because these Canadians are going to be charging up that hill, don't forget. Now at the north end, yeah, they're going to have a heck of a job because that's hill 145, and then over to the left of it, a little place called the Pimple. These are going to be the most difficult places to actually capture because they're quite up. And then right before the battle, a mistake has been made. It's right in front of hill 145. And it's one of the most important objectives because it's the highest point on the whole of the ridge. Yeah, if this isn't captured, the Germans can bring their guns to bear and shoot down the rest of the ridge. So right at the top there, it's 4th Division. They have got to take it. But this officer commanding of the centre part says, can you not concentrate your artillery on the German frontline trench? We want to preserve it and use it as our headquarters. That'll be a deadly mistake for many, many Canadians, I can tell you. Now, as you go sloping down the ridge, so you've got 4th Division on the top there, then the 3rd, 2nd, and right at the bottom, you've got the 1st Division. And part of their actually attack goes over the ridge, but that's for a little bit later on because I'm going to get carried away if I'm not careful. So the infantry had all of these imaginary lines, their trenches to capture, like the black line, the blue line, the red line, and so on and so forth. And the way they were going to do it, I think, is wonderful. They were leapfrogging. So they'd hit the first trenches, they would consolidate, then more troops would pass over those and move on. Then as they were followed, they left troops behind to do the mopping up, Germans in their deep dugouts. This is so well organized. However, way down on the ridge, you have men with the Vickers machine gun, that's the heavy machine gun, yeah, are actually with the troops, basically in the 3rd or 4th wave. But in the confusion, the weather, the sleet, the mist, these guys end up at the front and don't realize that they are now, with their heavy machine guns, going to be at the front. And as the whole thing advances on this sector, they suddenly find themselves on the edge of the ridge, and they can see all the Germans running away down below. So they set up their Vickers machine guns and they start to hammer away at the Germans who are trying to escape. This whole story, for me, as a real enthusiast of the First World War, is kind of wow, yeah? But let's get back to zero, shall we? 0 hour. Let's have a look at how the whole thing actually went. So 0 hour, 9th of April 1917, is set at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. There are 30,000 Canadian troops all standing by and waiting for 0 hour. In the German trenches, and some of them in that deep down in their dugouts, are 10,000 German defenders. A large number of them, if I remember correctly, Bavarian troops, yeah, all seasoned veterans. So they are standing by. They know something's in the air, but they're not quite sure what it is because they haven't been able to observe. Another thing is the Canadians have been fighting the Germans in no man's land for weeks. They've been doing that box barrage where they've been isolating positions, charging, capturing, destroying trenches, gathering intelligence, yeah? And you've got the Air Force upstairs, right? The Royal Flying Corps there, spotting where the shells are landing. This isn't going right, that isn't going right, because they now had Morse code. They could actually send messages from the planes down. They couldn't send a message back up, mind. So this whole thing is building up. 5:30 in the morning, out they go through their trenches. At the same time, the artillery open up with their 1,000 guns with their creeping barrage. And this shook the earth. Many of the soldiers, just glad to get out of those tunnels and out into the open, couldn't hear. And the smoke, everything in front of them, the Germans can't see them, suddenly appearing in no man's land. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my model, because yes, I've made another model, and we're going to show you how the Canadian infantry approached a German position, a heavy machine gun post. So what I've done is I've kind of recreated just a little bit of the Pimple at the far end of the Vimy Ridge, and this is a German concrete pillbox. Yeah, lots of the cover on it has all been blown off. The trenches were in the right state. There's lots of Germans are wounded or killed already in the trenches. Now what the Canadians do is, as well as their artillery, they have their heavy machine guns, the Vickers, laying down a suppressing fire. Yeah. Now this is just my model, just to illustrate how they went forward. First of all, you've got your attacking troops, and as I said, they didn't go in a great big extended line. They move forward trying to preserve life by following one behind the other. Yeah. Also in slightly different formations, but when they needed to attack, they were so disciplined they could, you know, go into their attack modes. But something I really like is if they come up against a machine gun post like this, instead of everybody falling dead to the machine guns and going to ground, they already had guys who were ready to go and assault from the left and from the right and get into the enemy trenches and start to do the fighting. So when they can get in, throwing hand grenades and doing all the stuff that they do, and then coming from the other side, they can then get behind the blockhouse, the machine gun post, and eliminate the enemy inside. And then the rest can actually advance. They also had Lewis gunners. This is a Lewis gun team here. They'll be moving forward with follow-up ammunition. So they'll clear one place. If barbed wire was intact, they got men who were trained to simply cut the barbed wire, and they would continually move on. Once they'd taken this one objective, the next wave will follow over them, and when these move forward, they will leave men behind to clear up, to make sure there's no hidden Germans. Look out for German snipers. And that was one problem for the Germans, the Canadian snipers. So the Canadian Army at this time had a fantastic asset, and that was their snipers, whether they were using the short magazine Lee Enfield rifle or the Canadian Ross rifle. They were superb. Many of them were First Nations and also Métis, yeah, and these had the ability, because they were hunters, yeah, to lie still, camouflaged, unseen, and just wait for the target and pick them off. And they were superb, and they countered the German threat of the German snipers. Yeah, and this whole battle is dominated by individuals who are doing these brave things, carrying the machine guns forward and so on and so forth, except when you get back up to Hill 145. If you remember, I mentioned that they didn't want the frontline German trench to be obliterated. Well, unfortunately, the Canadians couldn't get to it as the barrage passed over it. The mud, the rain, the snow, the sleet, you name it, it slowed them down. And the Germans retaliated. They filled that trench with machine guns, and the Canadians simply couldn't take it. It was awful, and the nightmare was beginning to appear, because they could now bring their machine guns to bear and fire down the rest of Vimy Ridge. It was going to take some hard fighting to capture that hill. So Hill 145 was eventually captured. Yeah, it took days to do so, cost a lot of lives. But the Pimple, right at the north end of the ridge, this other high point, was still to be taken. But there were no troops left in the front line to actually attack. Everybody was exhausted. They'd been fighting for days. So they brought in some reserve, the 46 Saskatchewan. That's my local bunch, if you like. Then you have the 50th, the Calgarys, and then the 44th Manitobas. But some of these guys had never been in action, and they go for the Pimple. They go at it in two different directions. They do that classic things, and they take it by the point of the bayonet. Further down the ridge, the Canadians have actually gone over the ridge and can see the fleeing Germans. Machine guns, artillery are firing at them. But they're also suffering a few casualties from snipers. And the Canadians do something that nobody else has managed to achieve in the First World War, not properly. They send out cavalry patrols. They had them ready. And these are small patrols. And they go off to try and see where the Germans have gone. And they find them. And the Germans machine gun one of the patrols down. Just one guy escapes. Another patrol blunders into them, and it escapes. Some of its men and horses are killed, but it manages to get back. And what this cavalry patrol achieved was intelligence. Now they can bring the artillery to blow that little village or those woods to pieces. Now the Germans have had to retreat. They've been pushed out, they've been fought out of their trenches, and they have gone all the way down the other side of Vimy Ridge, down onto what's called the Douai Plain. Now, if ever you go there as a tourist and you stand on Vimy Ridge where the memorial is, that's Hill 145 and the Pimple is just further along. And you look over, you can see 30 miles. So the Canadians took Vimy Ridge, yeah, and as they stood there atop and looking down on the Douai Plain, they must have been amazed what they had achieved. They had fought incredibly hard and incredibly brave, yeah. But 10,602 of them had become casualties. 3,598 of them had been killed. So there was a cost there. But something happened here. Canada fighting together as an army. It kind of woke the nation up, gave it its own self-respect. This is the Canadian ensign. Yeah, it's the old Canadian flag. But if you notice the modern Canadian flag, it actually has the maple leaf in the center. And I'd like to believe that that's where it was forged, on the heights of Vimy Ridge. Well done, Canada. Well, wasn't that an amazing battle? I hope you found it interesting. If you did, let's have some comments in the comments section. And remember, to support our channel, simply like, thumbs up, share and subscribe. And then we can do some more films like this. Thank you very much. Bye for now.